Hey, hi. So it's really nice to see you in this weird kind of way where I'm at home and you're at home, but I miss you all in class 1 so very, very much. I think about each and every one of you all the time, and I wanted to be able to still have some time to do some things like stories with you. I know that Mrs. Smith has been reading Paddington to you. Paddington is great, so I will let her do the whole Paddington thing. And I've gone upstairs in my house, where I am now, to look through books that I like to share with friends like you. And the first book that I've chosen is this one here. It's called Make Way for Ducklings, and it's a really old book. It was written a long time ago, and I've had this one for a long time. It is set in the public gardens in Boston, Massachusetts, in America, where I live. And the public gardens is one of my very favorite places to go ever. And I always used to take my Solomon to the public gardens when he was little to go and see the ducklings. When I was about your age, I loved ducks so much. So this is a special book I wanted to share with you, and I really hope you enjoy it. Make Way for Ducklings by Robert McCluskey. Mr. and Mrs. Mallard were looking for a place to live, but every time that Mr. Mallard saw what looked like a good place, Mrs. Mallard said it was no good. There were sure to be foxes in the woods or turtles in the water, and she was not going to raise a family where there might be foxes or turtles. So they flew on and on. When they got to Boston, they felt too tired to fly any further. There was a nice pond in the public garden which had a little island on it. "This is the very place to spend the night," quacked Mr. Mallard. So down they flapped. Next morning, they fished for their breakfast in the mud at the bottom of the pond. But they didn't find much. Just as they were getting ready to start on their way, a strange, enormous bird came by. It was pushing a boat full of people, and there was a man sitting on its back. "Good morning," quacked Mr. Mallard, being polite. The bird was too proud to answer. But the people on the boat threw peanuts into the water, so the Mallards followed them all the way around the pond and got another breakfast, better than the first. "I like this place," said Mrs. Mallard as they climbed out onto the bank and waddled along. "Why don't we build a nest and raise our ducklings right in this pond? There are no foxes and no turtles, and the people feed us peanuts. What could be better?" "Good," said Mr. Mallard, delighted that at last Mrs. Mallard had found a place that suited her. "But look out!" squawked Mrs. Mallard all of a dither. "You'll get run over!" And when she caught her breath, she added, "This is no place for babies with all those horrid things rushing about. We will have to look somewhere else." So they flew over Beacon Hill and round the State House, but there was no place there. They looked in Louisburg Square, but there was no water to swim in. Then they flew over the Charles River. "This is better," quacked Mr. Mallard. "That island looks like a nice place, and it's only a little way from the public garden." Sounding like Yoda, I don't know why. "Yes," said Mrs. Mallard, remembering the peanuts. "That looks like just the right place to hatch ducklings." There we are. There's the Charles River, Boston. So they chose a cozy spot among the bushes near the water and settled down to build their nest. And only just in time, for now they were beginning to molt. All their old wing feathers started to drop out, and they would not be able to fly again until new ones grew in. But of course they could swim. And one day they swam over to the park on the riverbank, and there they met a policeman called Michael. Michael fed them peanuts, and after that, the Mallards called on Michael every day. After Mrs. Mallard had laid 8 eggs in the nest, she couldn't go to visit Michael anymore because she had to sit on the eggs to keep them warm. She moved off the nest only to get a drink of water or to have her lunch, or to count the eggs to make sure they were all there. One day the ducklings hatched out. First came Jack, then Cack, then Lack, then Mack, Knack, Ooack, Pack, and Quack. Mr. and Mrs. Mallard were bursting with pride. It was a great responsibility taking care of so many ducklings, and it kept them busy. One day, Mr. Mallard decided he'd like to take a trip to see what the rest of the river was like further on. So off he set. "I'll meet you in a week in the public garden," he quacked over his shoulder. "Take good care of the ducklings." "Don't you worry," said Mrs. Mallard. "I know all about bringing up children." And she did. She taught them all how to swim and dive. She taught them how to walk in a line, something we could do a little bit of practice with in Class 1, I feel. Just saying. To come when they were called, and to keep a safe distance from bikes and scooters and other things with wheels. When at last she felt perfectly satisfied with them, she said one morning, "Come along, children, follow me." Before you could wink an eyelash, Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Ooack, Pack, and Quack fell into line just as they had been taught. Good thing that, isn't it? Mrs. Mallard led the way into the water, and they swam behind her to the opposite bank. There they waded ashore and waddled along until they came to the highway. Are those cars cool? I like them. Mrs. Mallard stepped out to cross the road. Went the horns on the speeding cars. Went Mrs. Mallard as she tumbled back again. Went Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Ooack, Pack, and Quack, just as loud as their little quackers could quack. The cars kept speeding by and honking, and Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings kept right on quack, quack, quacking. They made such noise that Michael came running, waving his arms and blowing his whistle. He planted himself in the center of the road, raised one hand to stop traffic, and then beckoned with the other, the way policemen do, for Mrs. Mallard to cross over. Hey, have you ever seen anybody stop traffic and let people or ducklings or anything else cross the road safely? Maybe that's something you could have a chance to play around with. Not in the road, not near the road, just with your toys or with your brothers and sisters or whatever. Put one hand out to stop traffic. Beckon with the other. Or maybe now, as in after the story is finished, maybe today would be a really good time for you to sit down and have a chat with your grown-ups at home all about road safety and the things that you can do to keep safe when you're out and about. I'd love to hear about it on Tapestry. Look forward to that. Let's get back to the story. As soon as Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings were safe on the other side and on their way down Mount Vernon Street, Michael rushed back to his police booth. He called Clancy at headquarters and said, "There's a family of ducks walking down the street." Clancy said, "Family of what?" "Ducks!" yelled Michael. "Send a police car, quick!" That's how we talk in New England. That's how we talk in Boston. Car. Try it. Car. R, R, or K, ah. I say tomato, you say tomato. I say cat, you say car. Meanwhile, Mrs. Mallard had reached the corner bookshop and turned into Charles Street with Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Uack, Pack, and Quack all marching along in line behind her. Everyone stared. An old lady from Beacon Hill said, "Isn't it amazing?" And the man who swept the street said, "Well now, ain't that nice?" And when Mrs. Mallard heard them, she was so proud she tipped her nose in the air and walked along with an extra swing in her waddle. When they came to the corner of Beacon Street, there was the police car with 4 policemen that Clancy had sent from headquarters. The policemen held back the traffic so that Mrs. Mallard and the Ducklings could march across the street. It's a really busy intersection there, or junction, as you would say. Lots of cars going different directions, so it would have been an incredible thing to have those ducks. Mrs. Mallard plus Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Whack, Pack, Quack, Cack, I think I'd say. Yeah, how many ducks is that? Anyway, to get them across the street would be amazing. But they did. They marched across the street right into the public garden. By the way, right there, ooh, yeah. There's often a lemonade stand that has the best lemonade in the world when it's really hot. Recommend. Back in the room, Miss Tinder. Where were we? In the public garden. Right. Here we are. Inside the gate, they all turned round to say thank you to the policeman. The policeman smiled and waved goodbye. When they reached the pond and swam across to the little island, there was Mr. Mallard waiting for them, just as he had promised. The Ducklings liked the new island so much that they decided to live there. All day long they follow the swan boat and eat peanuts. And when night falls, they swim to their little island and go to sleep. And that's the end. If you're having this story at bedtime, I hope you go to sleep too. Night-night. Well, do you know what, Class 1? I actually found that quite tricky. I am not used to reading stories on my own to a computer screen in a really small space, having to keep fairly still and having to keep my voice about the same so it doesn't do silly things to the microphone. I'm not used to working with books in front of my face this way and not being able to see what I'm reading very well. I promise I'll get better. But most of all, what I found the most difficult was not having you guys to kind of bounce ideas off of, because your reactions to story times are great. So if there's something you'd like to tell me about Make Way for Ducklings or anything else, please ask your parents to put it up on Tapestry. Record a video of you on your phone, your mom's phone, your dad's phone, whatever phone, and tell me about it. I can't wait to hear it, and I wonder what book we'll share next. I'll see you all soon. Bye-bye.